I was a new creature, a different type of body coming into the Octagon, feeling different, lighter, feeling faster. I just want to test it out. I think you'll see something you haven't seen from me in a long time in the Octagon. I'm going to come out balls blazing. Or, why you got to get the suits involved? I thought you were a street fighter. And with that, welcome to Early Stoppage, a show where the news of the day is usually given just enough time, but sometimes not enough. If this is your first time stopping by, we thank you, and get ready for something you won't find anywhere else. I'm John Franklin, and I'm joined as always by Craig Allen, the godfather of Fight Night Picks. Craig, how are you?
John, I'm well. I'm really excited for this episode of Early Stoppage. I'm excited that sports are back. I'm donning a Red Sox jersey. If you're wondering at home, who's on the back of your Red Sox jersey, Craig? Well, good question, viewer at home. Listen, I just want to say this. YouTube MMA is totally different from Twitter MMA. It's totally different from Facebook MMA and Instagram MMA. And we have a segment or segments closer to the end of the show that'll show you that. Now, lately, Matt and I have been making references to baseball, basketball, hockey. They've all been pretty well received. So, again, Red Sox jersey. You're wondering who the name is on the back. Dirty Craig. Craig Kimbrell, member of the Chicago Cubs now. I was a big Kimbrell fan. Had to go out buy the Players Weekend jersey. I'm excited. All that aside, we've got a lot of MMA to talk about. And, yeah, what's going on, John?
I'll tell you who's not a fan of Craig Kimbrell, my son, because he was getting shelled the other night, couldn't get a strike to save his ass for the Cubs, and my son was losing his mind because my son is a huge baseball fan. We have the baseball package. But with that being said, on this episode of Early Stoppage, we talk goats at heavyweight, why Aljamain Sterling isn't the go-to at bantamweight, and Jorge Masvidal cornholing. I'll let that sink in, Craig. This is just into the Early Stoppage news desk. Dana White has no chill. I'm kidding. That's not a news flash. It's one of the more widely known and understood things in all of MMA. So this week he flexed on all the fighters and said, if you approach an official, be it a referee or judge, in the words of his good friend Donald Trump, you're fired. Craig, is this a Dana flex, or is it actually Dana looking out for what's in the best interest of fighters?
I was cool with him saying this. I don't think it's much of a flex, and I think he is probably looking out for the best interests of not just the fighters, but the referees and his relationship with the commissions. So I'm fine with him going that route. It's also weird because it was the last card at Fight Island. You probably want to preserve your relationship that you have there as well, because it looks like, hey, you're going to have more international fighters that want to fight that you can't get to the States anytime soon. I mean, it's weird that you can have Canadian fighters, and we'll get into it a little bit. You know, Tanner Bozer's been a breakout star of this whole kind of quarantine era of MMA. He's a Canadian. As a Canadian, I can't drive to a land border and get into your country unless I'm essential service, but you can fly down there. That's what we've seen from some of these guys. You get TJ Laramie coming up in week 2 of Dana White's Contender Series. All that being said, you have to preserve the relationships with the referees, with the commissions. These are guys that you're going to want to bring in time and time again. And I think for Dan Hardy, and we talked about it last week, it was in the thumbnail for a little bit, but it will live on in the title forever. It's a huge topic. We're still kind of dealing with it, but the aftermath, of course, like you said, is Dana White kind of really coming down hard on not Herb Dean. I mean, you can disagree with the stoppage. You can be fine with it, whatever. But for Dan Hardy to really kind of say his piece, it's going to live on in that picture or a series of pictures. And overall, I think it's probably him looking out for the best interests of the fighters, the promoter, or the fighters, the managers, the commissions. It's kind of a damage control type of thing. What's easier to try and manage? Everybody or just the one person that went after your referee? It's probably kind of trying to address that one person. So I'm fine with what Dana had to say. I'm fine with what Dan Hardy did. I'm fine with a little bit of oversight for referees, but I mean, I'm all right with his response.
Yeah, I like it too. One of the things that's cool about being a dad, whether it be me being your father or the father of my children here in Phoenix, is that once you're a dad, there's a 3-word phrase that you get to use that you might not use for the whole rest of your life. And that's cut the shit. When you're a dad, you tell your kids, hey, cut the shit. And you can use it when you're a bouncer in different places, but especially when you're a dad. I think this is Dana telling fighters, hey, cut the shit. Let the referees do their job. Let the judges do their job. I think he picked an example if he's going to make an example out of anybody, I really do think that Dan Hardy is not happy with the way that he conducted himself. I think he thinks he's right, but I think if he had that to take back, he would take it back. And I think that this is just Dana. You know, when I was in the military, I used to say, you know, if you make an example of one person, you get in one fight in front of everybody, you never have to fight again. If enough people see you kick somebody's ass, you're just an ass kicker. And I think that Dana went after Hardy so that he never has to have this conversation again. And I think that he accomplished his goal.
Well, I mean, let's transition from that into something else that's not really getting the headlines I think it should, because you've got this big trilogy bout coming up next weekend, UFC 252. And John, it seems like after a lot of lobbying, some weird Firehouse Coffee ads, and some ice cold Modelo, heavyweight champ Stipe Miocic has made peace with the fact that he'll be competing at a smaller cage coming up next weekend. So he went as far as to say in a quotable, "We've definitely been training wrestling more." And he also said to bring my wrestling shoes. He'll definitely be trying to wrestle me, but every fight starts standing. Don't forget that, in regards to Daniel Cormier. So in terms of this fight coming up, it's a huge one. We're talking legacy status, but do you think we'll see much of an effect with this fight compared to their last two, being in a smaller cage versus the regular 30-foot cage?
Well, first off, can we address the Modelo ad where the light beer was, or the light? Yeah, that was a little.
Not a good look.
That was not a good look. Modelo, you got to do better than that. Let's move on. I do think the fight will be different in a smaller cage. I do think that let's look at DC's track record. When he has a fight, that the stakes are high in terms of like there's a higher risk than reward. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case here, but when he fought Anderson Silva, what did he do? Grabbed him, got a hold of him, got him down, kept him there. I think that Daniel Cormier wants to end his career on a win. I think the way to end his career on a win would be to wrestle Stipe Miocic. The problem is, I think that Stipe is a nimble enough fighter. Stipe he is one of the best guys at having power off his moving backwards and off his back foot. Now, I will say that I've been saying for a really long time, and this might make me seem smart, or you might completely disagree with it, might make me feel stupid. But him being a baseball player, and baseball players planting their back foot and swinging their hips, I think that's where Stipe generates his moving backwards power. But, you know, I certainly don't have enough degrees on my wall to back that up with any kind of physiology. So that's my thought. I think that if DC wants to end on a win, the way to do it is to wrestle. I think that's what we're going to see.
I think so too. I mean, you look at the stats and you see there's a lot more finishes in some of these fights, but we've seen wrestlers, especially bigger wrestlers, have more success going to the well. You saw it with Curtis Blades and Volkov. I mean, that's what he had to do. Now, these guys aren't as tall, but they are as big as those fighters. And if you look at the second fight, one of the stats that I actually really like is Cormier in terms of significant strikes, 181 to 230 total strikes for Miocic, 123 significant strikes for 135 total. So distance management was a factor in that fight. We saw when it came in close, they could really swing it in the phone booth. And that was kind of the way that the first fight ended. Second fight was different. Third fight, yeah, I think you're going to see Daniel Cormier coming out with that credentialed Olympic caliber type of wrestling from Oklahoma State. I think you're going to see Stipe kind of try and counter that. Now, obviously not as credentialed, but still a very, very good wrestler in that division. And like you said, and I like that, Stipe Miocic came up in baseball in a time when you saw guys moving around in the box. You saw them changing their approach. And you still see that these days, albeit more with the analytical tools. In MMA, it's weird because you got to try and play it to your circumstances. And like you said, I thought you brought up a really good example. Daniel Cormier, when I got to pick up a win, I go to that wrestling pedigree. When he fought Derek Lewis at heavyweight, I need to add a feather to my cap and a win. I'm going to wrestle him and submit him. When he fought Volkan Oezdemir, primary striker at light heavyweight, I'm just going to wrestle him, get on top, man, a crucifix, bam, bam, end that fight. So in this one, you need that GOAT status. You want that 2 out of 3 in the rubber match. You're going back to your wrestling. So I think Stipe is right. Kind of weird that he lobbied for a bigger cage, even though you probably knew you weren't going to get it. And glad to see that he's at peace here with this.
Yeah, I agree. I think the play, I get why he would lobby for the bigger cage. I think that he shouldn't have made it as obvious that it was a strategic play. He should have just said, we're heavyweights. It's a main event. The heavyweight's the baddest man on the planet. He should be fighting in a big cage. He should have made it like a status thing and not like a strategic thing, because now Cormier, it could be gamesmanship. He might be ready for it. All right, Craig, you're a hockey guy, so let's go ahead and pander to you. The NHL announced the Seattle Kraken. Interestingly enough, the beauty of the Seattle Kraken is they actually are sponsored by something that's fitting, unlike these other sports entities that are sponsored by stuff that has nothing to do with them. Kraken, I think, is it whiskey?
Yeah, it's whiskey. Great stuff.
Kraken whiskey, Seattle Kraken, perfect fit. And just like the giant squid, we had a small glimpse of Conor McGregor in 2020. And just like that, he's gone again, if you believe the Dana White guarantee, which we'll talk more about Dana White guarantees later. Craig, we're feeding a fed horse at this point, but do you think without a live gate, we'll see Conor back in the Octagon in 2020? And we're going to touch on some other things to do with this later in the show. But I guess my big question is not only that, but why does Dana do this? Like, why does Dana start to use the media to get fighters in or out of the cage?
I really don't think we're going to see him back in 2020. Why? I mean, Khabib Nurmagomedov. We're going to see him back in the cage? Probably. Maybe not. I don't know. Looks like a fight's already been booked. So, yeah, we're probably going to see Khabib fight this fall as advertised. Justin Gaethje, unify the belts. Do I think he's going to win? I think Justin Gaethje has a good shot in that fight, more than anybody really has in times past. I thought Tony Ferguson was the guy. Gaethje made him look like a deer in the headlights. I mean, made him look like a fighter that we haven't seen in, 8 years, 9 years when he fought Michael Johnson, that last loss. So I think the Gaethje has a good shot. Point being, Khabib fights that one time. Are we going to see him back for a second time? Probably not. So for me, without a live gate, you don't get Conor McGregor. He's the guy that gets the pay-per-view points. He probably gets a share of that live gate. He gets a share that we probably don't see. So he's your biggest star. Without the fans, I don't think you're going to see him. The last time you saw him was with fans against Cerrone it was a tune-up fight to get ready for the year. But now, again, you don't have the fans. It's going to be tougher to try and get international stars into the States unless the United Arab Emirates throws a ton of money at Conor McGregor on the side and says, hey, we want to have you fight on Fight Island and boost that tourism industry. That's the only way I could see it. So realistically, no. And to answer your question, why does Dana do stuff like this? Why not? I mean, who else is putting Conor McGregor's name in the media right now? I mean, you got Proper 12, but who else? Khamzat Chimaev? Does that sell Conor McGregor? I don't think so. So he needs a little push from Dana, but ultimately, I don't think we're going to see him back in 2020.
Yeah, there are certain fighters who can pack the house, and there are certain fighters who can't. Sometimes the UFC can pack the house on its own. But, when you talk about live gates, the reason why live gates are different, not just because of the attendance, right? So if Stipe Miocic fights and Conor McGregor fights and they're both sold out, the Conor McGregor gate is higher because you can charge more for a Conor McGregor fight. Ringside seats cost much more for a Conor McGregor fight than they do for a Stipe Miocic fight. So that brings an extra ingredient into the situation, into the stew of the UFC. So for me, I think, the perfect part of this question that you asked is, without a live gate, are you wasting Conor McGregor's time? And are you wasting your own time in having Conor fight on a part of the whole mystique of Conor is the crowd and everything that comes with the buzz around a Conor fight? I'm with you. I think that the UFC wants to have Conor fight big events, and you can't have a big event right now. The other piece of the pie is that if Conor's not going to fight Khabib, I think about Conor the exact same thing I think about GSP. He is a groundhog who's only coming out for a certain reason, right? The only reason Conor McGregor's coming out and showing his face, realistically, is a massive fight or a massive belt. And a massive belt would have to be one that he does not have. I think he's more interested in being the 170-pound champion than he is avenging the Khabib loss. That's just me. I could be wrong. So the question becomes, if you're Dana, can you trust that Conor would fight and potentially beat Kamaru Usman? Now he's holding you hostage. I think as much as Dana likes Conor bringing the money, he hates Conor holding up the belts. So I think that's part of this too.
And I mean, a little bit of inside baseball with the Red Sox uni tonight. John saying that great job asking that question. I wrote the question. You asked the question. So thank you. You asked a great question. And John, the video game guy that you are, I know when you're not up late smashing noobs on Fortnite, you're crushing Red Bulls and spamming overhand rights with Chuck Liddell, as Mike Goldberg would say on UFC 3, or maybe you're playing like the old THQ games. I like those. But we're getting into the dawn of UFC 4, and with it upon us, EA Sports has been releasing their star ratings based on the game's roster, and it's starting to get a little funky. So what struck you most out of the drops they've had so far in terms of these rankings?
Well, one of the things that struck me the most is friend of the show, Blaine Henry, took to Twitter today and said, who works at EA? A bunch of casuals? I agree and I disagree. I think that, no one's ever going to love the rankings. I think where EA either allowed this to get interesting and drew attention, or may have allowed this to get away from them, is including fighters who are not currently on the roster. Because then it opens the door for, man, Demetrius Johnson is ranked, 11th? What's he doing in 1? George St. Pierre is ranked higher than Kamaru Usman. Like, some of these things that you're seeing is opening door. Where's Chris Cyborg at? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're seeing a lot of things that are like opening the door for some trouble. I don't really get too wrapped up in this. I might see something and go, it's interesting that guy's over that guy. But, like, I don't really get too wrapped up in it. Is there anything that stood out to you?
It's got to be the fact that, again, you have fighters that aren't on the roster that are ranked incredibly high. Like, Chris Cyborg doesn't make any sense. Demetrius Johnson doesn't make any sense. A UFC video game. And I understand, why not market them? You already paid for their likeness, so you can still use them, and they're probably getting a small percentage of the pay, just like those college football players that weren't named but were named in the video game. Finally, they got paid. So it gets a little squirrely. GSP at 9 is silly, because when was the last time he fought? UFC, 217? So it's been a minute. The thing that I like, actually, is the fact that Valentina Shevchenko 4, Zhang Weili 7, that makes sense because they're so much better than the other fighters at flyweight and strawweight, respectively. And maybe the pack's a little bit closer to Zhang Weili than it is to Valentina Shevchenko, and hence why you're not seeing more flyweights, women's flyweights, higher up in the totem pole. But in terms of the ranking system, again, I get it. Some names that are on here that maybe other people wouldn't have thrown on. TJ Dillashaw 15. The other thing that gets kind of, froggy,
Glover T. Glover T is nice and high.
You have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 fighters in the entire game with a star rating of 5. You have a ton of 4.5s. So really, who knows what a true 4.5 is? Because you have 4.5 from number 5 all the way down to I'm at 31. Yeah,
I'm at 40. He's a 4.5.
43. 43 is a 4.5. Dustin Poirier. Well, how's Dustin Poirier worse than RDA, who's right above him? How's he worse than Joseph Benavidez right now? And I'm sure they put these ratings together a while ago. They are incredibly squirrely. If you're a UFC fan, you just take what you get, and fighters are fighters. And hopefully you end up with a C+ or a C in a CM Punk at welterweight. You go out there and play online with CM Punk like I do sometimes.
Well, here's where it gets real weird for me, is because when you take a fighter and you rank him as high as you've ranked GSP, the question becomes, what are you ranking him based on? Are you ranking him based on his prime, or are you ranking him based on where he is right now? Because then it says, well, then why is BJ Penn not ranked higher than Petr Yan? Why is, if you're saying that GSP is ranked better than Kamaru Usman, it takes some guts. Now, listen, I would love to see Kamaru Usman and GSP fight tomorrow, and I think it would be a better fight than most people would. But I don't know that I would rank GSP ahead of Kamaru Usman at present. So if that's the case, and we're taking GSP at his best, well then where's Randy Couture? Where's, I think the smart move here, what they should have done, and I know they wanted to gain some attention with the rankings, and I respect that. I think they should have used non-rostered athletes as guys you could unlock. That's an easy way to go. If you did the Madden ratings tomorrow, you wouldn't have Barry Sanders in there.
No, and they'll do it, which they've done it before. Like they had Chael Sonnen, Vanderlei Silva, Kimbo Slice, Dan Severn. Like they had those drops. And the other troubling thing for me too, and I've talked about this at length, is the fact that this video game is less about UFC and more about let's just throw darts at a board and see what hits. Because again, you have Kumite, you have backyard boxing, you have Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. They're trying so hard to appeal to so many different people with this. And maybe it has to do with the fact that your major sports, your baseball, your basketball, your NFL, they're either in limbo, they've hit snags, or in the case of the NHL, just popping right off right now. I know a friend of the show, Loudmouth MMA Zone, Kyle Steele, doesn't think that the NHL is a big deal with his meme drops. But listen, NHL is doing just fine in Edmonton, Alberta, and Toronto, Ontario. So they're doing a great job. But for the UFC, they're really, really going to the well and trying to grab as much water and stuff that's in the well, just that gunk on the casing, if you will, just to see what they can do. And I don't like it. I really don't.
The great Kyle Steele gets a mention. Kyle, I take it all back. I completely support whatever you want to do. I think you can do it. All right, let's move on, Craig. No one asked for it, but in the absence of NBC's PFL, the company delivered on its promise to provide additional content to fight fans by launching its own streaming platform with free content on PFL MMA app. Craig, we knew when Lauren Mack was brought over from one championship that they'd be on to big things. So what's the reaction to this announcement? Does it give PFL another edge in terms of moving into the market? Does it register at all? What are your thoughts on PFL with the OTT?
I'm all for it. I mean, you're NBC. You got to go big. You got to do stuff like this. I think Lauren Mack's great. Really good pickup from one championship. Really kind of has the finger on the pulse. The one thing I would say, if you're an MMA fan, there's too many apps out there. I mean, if you want to watch BKFC and you want to watch Ryzen, if you're in North America, you need the Fight TV app. And there's credits involved that you can get if you share it with friends and this and that. We could really have a promo code if we wanted, and we gain credits out of it, and we could watch M1 Global for free instead of paying for the pay-per-view. But look at it this way. There's UFC, there's PFL, Bellator has an app, one championship has an app, and on and on and on. I think it's great for this fact. And we talked about this a little while ago. So if you've been following along with Early Stoppage, you'd remember PFL said that they were going to have all this extra content. They're basically going to have the 30 for 30s of PFL. They're going to have a Randy Couture documentary. They're going to have a Rory McDonald series, and he hasn't even put the gloves on and fought a single fight for them. I think it's great. I love how they're doing this because in their email that they sent out to media, I'm looking at it right now, it says PFL unlocks its vault. Access classic fights on demand. They've had 2 seasons. How could these fights be classics? And what fights are you going to go back and watch? You're going to go back and watch Lance Palmer fight Alex Gilpin like 3 times last season? I think it's cool. I think it's awesome. One of the other promo emails that they sent out, and credit to Lauren Mack, Professional Fighters League continues global expansion through multi-year broadcast partnership with Russia's Telesport Group. I think they're really trying to position themselves well, and they're giving to fight fans what they want rather than what the UFC is doing and just going, hey, look at our video game. Like, they might as well have Mario Kart UFC style on that thing. It's just way too squirrely for me. But I think the PFL is really kind of taking a turn and saying, hey, we don't have fights right now. The UFC has their fight library. Let's try and kind of do a 180. We'll kind of do the same thing, but we'll have more original content. It's a little bit, it's just like, the NBA and this league. It's a copycat league, just like every other league is. And I get this is a league as well. And I'm going to stop saying league in a second. But I'm excited for this. I really like what they're doing. And hopefully it draws fans in, because I think the PFL is original enough that they've got something going on that'll really catch somebody's eye. Or Kevin Hart and Tony Robbins are directly funding an app that might never go anywhere.
Yeah, for all we know, all Kevin Hart's like laugh out loud or live out, whatever his app is, or his content that he does might end up on there. So really quickly, just to cover the classic fights part of this, it's going to be the World Series of Fighting. They're going to put World Series of Fighting fights on there. So that, from that perspective, there were some good fights in the World Series of Fighting, not too bad. But here's the thing. I agree with you and I disagree with you in the sense that I really think the things that they are doing are really good things. My only question is are you putting forth, we talk a lot, you and I talk about it, I talk about it with Cameron, the old 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your work goes to 20% versus 20% of your work goes to 80%. So my question is are they doing all this content to only garner a 20% portion of the fan base when the UFC just made a video game? Now they got a bunch of casuals, a bunch of young kids. I agree with you that from our perspective, the PFL going through all this trouble to make this great content. And guys, it's great content. It really is. The stuff they're doing is really, really good. But the question is like, you can take the best produced movie of all time, right? And you put Channing Tatum in it, it's one movie, and you put Robert De Niro in it, and it's a different movie. So right now, the PFL has a bunch of Channing Tatums, and the UFC has a bunch of Robert De Niros. So the problem for them is, do you gain more just by being the AAA for the UFC and the feeder league than you do by making all this content? I know they're trying to make the best meal with the ingredients that they have. The question is, should you just try and get a little bit better ingredients?
Pump the brakes. And listen, this is again a little inside baseball. This is the first time you're tuning into Early Stoppage. John's the biggest stand for letting the PFL become the minor league baseball of the UFC. And I agree. I'm not going to stand on that hill forever. I think it's a great idea, but I like what they're doing. And in terms of underrated weird movie recs, I'm going to go way off the board. The movie adaptation of the book Phantoms by Dean Koontz, that's a sleeper pick. I found it as a DVD. Actually, my stepdad, I'll tell the truth. My stepdad found it as a DVD at an Irving gas station here. I had a book report to do on it. I just watched the DVD. And listen, I made my way through high school. So, hey, it works. And that's a great movie. Thoughts?
As your biological father, I can't stand when your stepfather comes up. That's it. That's
all right, fair enough. All right, we'll move on. And John, this week, Matt Allen and Craig Allen caught some heat in our assessment of the Chris Weidman and Omari Akhmedov fight. And we gave Chris Weidman an avenue to victory, citing the fact that, Omari Akhmedov realistically is the best stylistic matchup for him in the division in the top 15. But win, lose, or draw, right now as it stands, Chris Weidman's 1-5 in his last 6 fights since he dropped the belt to Luke Rockhold at UFC 194, and every loss has either come by knockout or TKO. And I know the loss to Gegard Mousasi was controversial, but look at the loss to Jacare Souza. I mean, that one went on for too long. So my question here is, regardless of what happens on Saturday, whether he beats Akhmedov or loses, what's the next step for Chris Weidman?
Have you ever walked into the Mohegan Sun? You ever walked into any casino that is
Casino New Brunswick, Casino Nova Scotia?
Have you ever walked into a Bellator event?
No, never. I want to, but it's 10 hours away.
Okay, so the next time you go to a Bellator event, or when you're able to do so, walk in there, right? Take a big breath and see what a Bellator event smells like, because that's what Chris Weidman smells like right now. He smells like Bellator.
Can you still smoke cigarettes in casinos in the States?
Yeah. So when you stand next to Chris Weidman, you say to yourself, this guy smells like Thackerville, Oklahoma. This guy smells like the Mohegan Sun. He's got Bellator written all over him. And I think that it's enough already with, him and Luke Rockhold need to just go to Bellator, fight each other there. That's where they need to be. I just think that it's enough. I like the guy. It was great for the sport. Somebody said that him knocking out Anderson Silva was a top 30 all-time knockout. And friend of the show, Blaine Henry, said, what? Of course it's a top 30 knockout of all time. It's probably top 10. So my point is that he's had his moment. And thank you for it, Chris. I like what you did. I like who you represented. You carried on the Serra Longo lineage from Matt Serra. You almost passed it on to Jean Vellante, but not quite. You almost passed it on to Al Iaquinta the night he fought Khabib. That would have been, you want to talk about a 30 for 30, Craig? Al Iaquinta beats Khabib Nurmagomedov. You got Serra beating GSP, Weidman beating Silva, Iaquinta beating Nurmagomedov. I mean, that's a 30 for 30 if ever there was one. I just think it's time for Weidman to move on.
Come on, baby! I love doing my Matt Serra impression, and that was the time. But I look at this, Chris Weidman, to me, you draw parallels with Forrest Griffin. Forrest Griffin, superstar off The Ultimate Fighter Season 1, becomes UFC light heavyweight champ. And then this is where it gets weird. Everybody said, he took too many beatings and he had to retire early and this and that. I'm looking at his record. It's not as bad as some other fighters that might have or should have retired a lot quicker, because you had him. He beats Rampage, won the belt at UFC 86. Then he loses to Rashad Evans, UFC 92. Then he loses to Anderson Silva, 101. Then he tested positive for Xanax, which is insane. beats Tito Ortiz, beats Rich Franklin, loses to Shogun, gets knocked out in the first round. Then he beats Tito Ortiz again in a fight of the night. So, yeah, he had some tough fights. And listen, it was probably the best idea for him to retire early. I mean, you see it more often now than you did then. Henry Cejudo, we talked about it recently. But you look at him and you can draw a parallel with Chris Weidman. Weidman's 36 right now, 1 of 5 in his last 6. Yeah, he finished Kelvin Gastelum, arm triangle choke, classic wrestler technique. Jack Hermanson finished Kelvin Gastelum quick. It's not like Kelvin Gastelum's fish in water on the mat. He's a fish out of water in the mat. And sometimes he gives up too. So it's one of those ones that's weird. I'd like to see it personally where, hey, ride off into the sunset. Win or lose, I had a good run. I was a champ for a long time. I'll always be either remembered as the All-American champ that beat Anderson Silva twice, or C, as the guy that lost my belt to Luke Rockhold. Then my dad grabbed the mic from Joe Rogan and said, "It's still my boy!" So it's one of the two. I'm not in a position to say what Chris Weidman should do. That's up to him, his coaches, and his family. But I think at the end of the day, I don't want to see this guy who I have built up in my mind as a great UFC champion as needing to fight or needing a win. So I want to see him just ride off into the sunset. UFC pay him a nice salary to make appearances and maybe do some work for the PI like Forrest Griffin does, or find another spot for him. But I don't need to see him in the cage.
I think our tagline should be on any commercials that we have: come for the MMA analysis and banter, stay for Craig's impressions. I think they're the thing that really grips. If you're a fan of this show, those impressions are what make you a fan of this show. Those impressions aren't for casuals. They're for the early stoppage hardcores. Fair. All right, Craig, let's move on to sparring sessions. This week we got a big one. We just had a close main event to cap off Fight Online between Robert Whitaker and Darren Till. You wouldn't know that Till lost based on the way that he's maneuvering around social media. And after that fight, we found out that Till blew out his MCL after an oblique kick by Whitaker. Somewhat coincidentally, it's the same injury Till gave to Stephen Thompson when they fought. Till ended up apologizing, saying, "I actually feel your pain," probably in a Cockney accent that I can't pull off. Question here, Craig, is we've seen injuries like this time and time again, sidelining athletes for long spurts of time. So is it time to ban these kicks to the knee?
I don't fucking care. That's my best Darren Till.
Not bad.
That's my best one. Or I actually feel your pain, and in that you get feel your pain, feel the pain. So it really appeals to a wide spectrum of MMA fans. But
he knows what he's doing.
I'm fine with it. If it's legal, do it. Really. It's just like foot stomps against the cage. I don't know why people don't do it anymore. Now, one thing that I used to love when I first got into MMA, so again, we're taking you back, 12 years, 11 years ago? Yeah, I'm a young guy. It was when guys would pass from half guard into side control, and then you remember when they used to kind of push off and throw those big knees to the body? You never see that anymore. You wonder why? Because it's easy to grab a single or reverse out of it or scramble. You don't see it anymore, but I thought it was cool back then because it would inflict some damage. But overall, things shift over time. And this is one of those things, oblique kicks and calf kicks. Everybody talks about calf kicks. Every weekend you watch MMA now, it's like somebody unlocked the vault at Gringotts, and we're just going in for that cash money from the magicians. I don't know what you want to call them. They weren't muggles. But they're going in there, lamp plays, cape plays, just scooping that Skrilla. If I look at this, it's one of those things that you got to learn how to defend it. You really do. For the calf kick, it's tough because you're always eye on the center line and trying to avoid the punches and high kicks, and it's tough to catch that low calf kick. An oblique kick's one of those ones that when you throw it, and if I could stand up and you could see it, I would throw it. It's a tough one to try and miss. You see it in the UFC video games. It's a perfect example. When you're blocking it, your guy just, I'm going to step back out of the way. It's a tough one to do when it's a fight, so I understand why it's so effective. John Jones was one of those first guys that you saw it used all the time. And just like his kind of flicks to the eye, it's one of those ones that you have to try and learn to avoid. So is it time to ban them? No. It's your job in there. If it's fully legal, you got to learn how to defend it. And it's tough. It's just like trying to hit a curveball. It's tough and you have to take your reps. But once you learn how to do it, you're going to really start to see fighters implement that in the game. Maybe they swipe it away. If that was a good whooshing sound effect. Maybe you switch stances. I don't know what you do right now, but it's the job of the athlete and the coaches to try and learn how to defend this, because that's such a bad injury.
I think we need to take a look at this. I like him just because I think it's good strategically, in the sense that what they were talking about on the fight the other day was I can't remember who the fighter was, the kid with the really skinny legs.
Me.
They were comparing him to John Jones, and they said part of the reason why John Jones,
Randy Brown.
Yep, one of the reasons why John Jones uses these kicks is to keep people off his own legs, and he's being offensive with his legs, so they're not available. And John Jones really does. I mean, he has a little bit of a stance, but sometimes he just fights straight up, just kicking at you. So I like it as a strategic move. But with that being said, we have to figure out really what is the damage here. And we're getting into a fight, and yeah, we're looking to inflict pain on the other. And yeah, we're looking to hurt the other guy, but are we looking to injure him? Hurting someone is different than injuring them, right? Hurting someone is, I knocked you out. Tomorrow you wake up, you got a black eye, you move on with your life. Injuring them is, now you're out for 6 to 8 months. So if we're saying that 12 to 6 elbows are not okay, if we're saying that knees to a grounded opponent are not okay, and we're starting to parse these things out, the fact that you're engaged in a strike, I know that they think certain things are defenseless. In this way, you're a defenseless fighter. The reality is you're never a defenseless fighter because you're in a fight. But my point is that we got to figure out the severity of this. I like them. I would keep them, but there's a reason to ban them because we don't want to lose these guys for this long stretch of time.
That's it. I mean, you can flip the coin. It's either I don't want damage in my cage fight, or I want to protect these fighters and A, their career, B, their lives, and C, they're making money for themselves and for me, the promoter. So yeah, I get it. It's a tough one. Like, I'd like to know in the comments what people are thinking about this. Do you get rid of the oblique kick or do you keep it? Does it have its place in the sport? I personally think it has its place. I believe you are thinking along the same lines, but it's an interesting one.
All right, Craig, let's move on to rank them. This week is an interesting one. We are going to talk about, with Dana White Contender Series coming back, we're going to talk about the alums, and I'll let you go ahead and get into ranking them.
Well, I mean, shouts to Craig and Matt Allen from way back when the whole pandemic started, because we started this whole series called Parry and Counter. And if you want to go back in, there's an hour and 22-minute long show where we recap season 1, 2, and 3, or you can watch them all separately. And we kind of pick out some of the top prospects from each season. The third season was tough because some of the fighters still haven't made their UFC debuts. And it gets a little squirrely because you had a Brazilian series thrown in there at the end of season 2. There was a Brazilian season, and we've seen a lot of good fighters come out of there. So if we look into it, we're going with the top Dana White's Contender Series alums, 3 from every season, and where they rank so far in their respective careers. Now, obviously, season 1 was 2017. We're 3 years removed. Season 2, and so on and so forth. And we just had the 4th season start up this past week, where all 4 favorites won their fights. And we're not going to see them so far, and we're not going to talk about them because they truly haven't had UFC fights. But I'm going to go through each season, list off the 3 that I came up with, and then we'll go from there and try and rank them. Season 1, you have Jeff Hands of Steel Neal, contender at welterweight right now. Sean O'Malley, who's fighting in the co-main event of UFC 252 against Marlon Vera. And Grant Dawson, who looks amazing at featherweight, or if he has to fight at a catchweight of 50, or where he's moving on to lightweight. So that's your season 1. Season 2, Macy Barber. Yeah, I mean, she lost that fight to Roxanne Modafferi. Going to have to go back to the drawing board there. Sadiq Youssef, who's looked amazing so far in the UFC. Edmund Shabazian. I don't think that's a controversial one to throw in there. He was in the thumbnail for the video that I made for that season. And I mean, he could still be a title contender. The guy's only 22 years old, losing a fight to a seasoned vet in Derek Brunson. There's no shame in that one. Then your Brazilian season, it gets a little tough. There's a few names that I could have picked and chose and thrown in. Augusto Sakai, he was at the top of the heap pretty well in Bellator before he came over to the UFC. He's been lights out in the UFC. Yeah, there was that weird fence grab in his fight against Blagoy Ivanov, but that's neither here nor there. He's looked great. Tyler Santos had a run-of-the-mill loss in her first UFC fight, won her Contender Series fight. She's, 16-1 now? Beat Molly McCann to a pulp in her last time out. Looks like a possible contender at 125. And then Howlin Paiva just beat Jelgash Magulov, the former Fight Nights Global Flyweight champ. He's had some fights where there was the one that he had against Bontarine, who I could throw onto this list because they were both in the same season, where his eyebrow blew up. But other than that, he looks amazing. And then season 3, it's tough to tell, but you got Brennan Allen, who's looked great at middleweight. Even when he's hurt, he comes back and wins. Good fight against Kaldakis. Alexa Kamor, a tough one because he's undefeated, has less than 10 pro fights, but in all those fights, he's electric on the feet and a real hot prospect at light heavyweight that I'm excited to see more out of. Fought Justin Ledet in his last time out, beat the brakes off him. And then Herbert Burns. Herbert Burns has a fight coming up very shortly, UFC 252, and we'll get into that a little bit, but he's looked amazing, finishing opponents and not riding the coattails of his brother Gilbert, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to this. Let's get into it in Fight Night Picks fashion. What do you think about this one here?
All right, so I'm going to give you the first two, which I think first 2 seasons, which I think I have a pretty good grasp on. And after that, for me, it's a crapshoot because they're too young. Now, that's unfair because realistically, at the end of a season, I should be able to say to you, these are the rankings of the guys I feel best about moving forward. So, but that's how I'm going to do it. All right, for me, it's Sean O'Malley, number 1, face of the brand. As a matter of fact, you know, the Snoop, Uriah, he just hit everything at the right time. Sadiq Youssef, then Jeff Neal, Macy Barber, Edmund Shabazian, Grant Dawson, and then I went like Talia Santos, Augusto Sakai, Roland Pavia. Got a little funky, and then I'll take Allen, Burns, and Kamor after that. What do you got?
If I had a total list for this, I agree. Sean O'Malley at the top for sure. I'd have Jeff Neal above Youssef just because of the fact that, he's really leading the charge at welterweight. People think this guy has legit title aspirations. He's dynamite in his hands. And if not title aspirations, fight of the night every time out. So I'd flip-flop those two. Barber where she's at. Dawson above Shabazian because, again, Dawson's still riding that hot streak. I'd have Augusto Sakai over Tyler Santos. A one-fight sample size doesn't do it for me, but she looked great. Paiva where he's at. And then if I could insert that season 3, I'd have Brennan Allen higher than Sakai and Santos and Paiva. I'd have Herbert Burns up there. His fight is against Daniel Pineda that fought in PFL and was supposed to fight in the finale against Lance Palmer, but he popped due to a banned substance. So they called his 2 fights before that no contest, which is weird. And then, of course, Lance Palmer had to fight Alex Gilpin again, which you can find in the PFL MMA app. And yeah, Alexa Kamor at the bottom, but it's tough because he's such a good prospect. So I'm really excited about all of the ones that we listed there. If you can hear it in my voice, it's true. And I'm looking forward to Dana White's Contender Series Season 4. I think there's some good talent out there. It's a shame that we've kind of watered things down with some of the additions that we've had to these, cards that we've had in Vegas. You're kind of throwing people in there. Just like we've had, Parker Porter's fighting Chris Dawkins. Like that's a real fight that's on UFC 252. You're not going to pay for it. It's on free TV, but it's wild that we're getting fights like that. So overall, those 3 seasons plus the Brazilian season, pretty good. And I'm really looking forward to more there.
All right, Craig, we're pretty much in here in the final 10 minutes. Let's get out of here in a rush. Let's talk about For the Gram, one Twitter hitter, and the book. This is going to be interesting this week because there's a couple things that I want to talk about. 2 really important ones, I think. And then one that's kind of like, we need to watch our step with. But let's start with For the Gram. I want to talk about Jorge Masvidal. There's a thing that came out this week where he's got some kind of weird match between some cornhole champion. And I guess he had done something with him before and got completely smoked in cornhole. And now him and the guy are going to do some kind of special rules match.
Oh, they did.
Oh, they did it?
Oh, exactly. They did it, and it was on your ESPN.
Interesting. So I want to talk to you about something, an interesting take on this. I was talking to somebody once, and we were talking about cheese curds, right? Cheese curds are, they're little pieces of cheese.
Oh, we.
Okay, so I said to them, cheese curds would be more popular if they weren't called cheese curds. That the phrase cheese curds, like milk curdles, it's not a great way to market it. So I'm just going to say this, Craig. Does Jorge Masvidal want to have anything to do with cornholing? Like, does he really want to even be what's the upside?
What's the upside? You're on ESPN again, and you're not fighting, so you're not taking damage. And B, the best thing that I saw, and I didn't see a lot of people talking about this, was I didn't watch it. Again, I'm in Canada. I have TSN, and I can hit on cheese curds at a later date. But the big point here, I saw a picture with the cornhole guy. That's terrible. A banner and Jorge Masvidal. Masvidal looking fly AF, and also had a bottle of mezcal tequila. Pretty good branding all around. And I think, who cares? If Jorge Masvidal loses to Kamaru Usman, not a big deal. Really isn't. You get to fight for a belt. Lifelong dream, maybe, but now you're getting even more points. You get more money. Everything worked out there. You put yourself on ESPN again, and you get an opportunity to brand yourself. Huge opportunity. Great job. It doesn't matter if it's cornholing. It could be lawn bowling. It could be darts. It could be whatever type of, fringe sport that you want. It could be motocross, and Jorge Masvidal could be there, and you're going to sell tickets and make money. So I'm fine with it. And my last point, I don't know about cheese curds in the United States of America, especially in the desert, but in Canada, I can go to any gas station right now and pick up a bag of cheese curds and eat them in my car because it's not a big deal and it's commonplace up here.
I'll say this. Here's where I like the move by Masvidal. If Masvidal somehow taps in, and this isn't a big thing in the UFC, but it could be, because UFC, a lot of fights take place in casinos. But if Masvidal could tap into tailgating at cards that are not in Vegas, the mezcal, the cornhole, that could be his play. If that's his play, I'm impressed. If he just starts showing up at tailgates and walking the parking lot with the mezcal, a couple of cute chicks, there's something there. All right.
Bill's Mafia, we're taking applications. Fight night picks, Bill's Mafia, or the dog pound with the Browns. And sorry, Bill's Mafia, I'm a Browns fan. I'd love you.
Here's the idea that if ESPN steals, and if you do steal, at least let Craig and I audition for the job. College game day, but for fighting. All right, next up, one Twitter hitter. Woodley and Covington are close to signing a fight. Woodley says it's done. Covington's ready to go. I want to talk about this with Conor and Khabib a little bit, just to put that into your brain. Is this fight, and by extension, this beef, just too hot to book? Like, do you not even want to get in the business of Woodley and Covington fighting each other? You just want to say, listen, you guys are adults. Usman did it with Covington in terms of getting booked. Just handle it. Be professionals.
To me, it sucks. I don't see the juice anymore. There was juice 2 years ago when Tyron Woodley beat Darren Till and Colby Covington had been stripped of the belt. That was when he should have made the fight. 2019, ball's still rolling. Colby Covington fights Kamaru Usman. I thought it was a great fight. I thought Covington was winning up into that point, and if the fight ended before he got knocked out, Covington would have won the fight. That's my own opinion. I'd have to go back and watch the tape 49 times like Luke Thomas. But overall, I think that you should have booked that fight with Woodley before the Usman fight, because nobody cares how well Colby Covington made out in that fight. They just know it as he lost that fight. And Tyron Woodley, yeah, I mean, he didn't look good against Burns. He didn't look good against Usman. But overall, I think there was so much marketability and juice there. These guys hated each other. You could have made this fight easily. Now you make the fight. Who cares? I mean, I get it. You're hurting for main events. You got Derek Lewis and Alexei Oleinik coming up this weekend, but you're not even marketing it. You're just going ahead and marketing your next heavyweight fight. That is a GOAT fight, and it's a trilogy fight, and it makes sense. But you put together Woodley Covington. Is that more impressive than Jessica I and Cynthia Calvillo? Like, what are we doing here?
I disagree with you only for this one reason. I think that if this fight got booked 5 or 10 years from now by Bellator, people would still eat it up. So I do think that they're not striking while the iron was hot, but it's still warm enough for some interest. All right, let's move on to posting to the book. I want to talk about Valerie Loureda. And this is the one we got to, dance around this thing and be careful with what we say, because, this is just the nature of cancel culture and all that. But Gareth Davies asked her a question. I'm paraphrasing here, something to the effect of, do you use your body to market yourself, and what do you think about that? And she said, now here's where I think she went wrong. She said, I don't market myself for other people. I market myself for myself. Well, that makes no sense, because the nature of marketing yourself is that it's for other people. So I don't want to get either one of us in too much trouble here, but is the answer really, listen, if these girls are going to use their bodies to get attention, just let them do it. Leave them alone. Stop asking the question. You're either not going to get the answer you want, or you're going to make them feel bad. What's the point in all this?
We talked about this a long time ago, and I'm not saying this to be a dingus, but do you remember when we talked about this? Because it was Macy Chason came out and said, listen, stick to fighting or don't do fighting anymore because you're just using fighting to market yourself and whatever you do on social media. And we talked about it at length. And at the time, I was fine with it. And right now, I'm still fine with it. Do whatever you want. If you want to start an OnlyFans, go ahead. I don't care. Do whatever you have to do to make money in the window that you have to make that money. Because Valerie Loureda, is she going to fight until she's 40, until she's 50? No. Is she still going to be, a master at her discipline? Probably. I mean, her father is a great MMA coach. So I could see her sticking with that. It's a lifelong pursuit. But in terms of how she markets herself, I understand Garrett Davies asking the question. I don't take issue with the question. But when you ask something like that, you should probably know what your answer is going to be. And for her to say, and again, paraphrasing whatever she did say, but basically if it's going to be, I put whatever I want out on social media, and if people react to it, they do. I understand her saying that. It's probably the right answer because you're not going to get in depth. And what's she going to say? Well, if you really look into my Instagram analytics, people like it when I post on Monday morning, and they like a post where I'm out on the balcony like this and really posing and thinking about my future. She's not going to say that. She's going to throw out the easiest answer that's out there. So I'm fine with whatever she does. I really don't care. She's got a fight coming up. By the time this comes out, the fight probably will have already happened, but she's 2-0 fighting 1-1 Telegraph, who hasn't fought in a little while. So it's pretty much a law ball type of fight for her. And if Telegraph wins, kudos to Telegraph. But I'm fine with whatever Loureda does. If you want to lump more fighters in there, like it's a thirst trap type of game. And if you want to play it, go ahead. I don't care.
All right, Craig, let's get out of here on this one. Let's give our shouts to MMA Reddit with start the conversation. So this week we're going to talk about Dana White's title shot proclamations. They're about as easy to predict as a toddler's mood when they wake up. Dana grants title shots to one fighter and not another, and there seems to be a sliding scale in terms of criteria. So the small question is, why did Dana commit to Jennifer Maia but not Aljamain Sterling? However, the larger question is probably, is there anything good that comes from him giving out title shots in this way?
I don't know how to answer this question, John. I really don't. I think it's ridiculous. Caitlin Chookagian obliterated Antonina Shevchenko. She should probably get a shot, but no, we're not even going to talk about Caitlin because her shot went so poorly. Let's have Jennifer Maia, who beats Joanne Calderwood, and it was a good win. Don't take anything away from her. I think she probably does deserve a shot. A lot of people said maybe 1 or 2 more fights for Maia before she gets it. I'm fine with it because who else is going to fight Valentina Shevchenko? But just not talking about Aljamain Sterling, we said it before, but this is one of those circumstances where, distance makes the heart grow fonder, but we've been growing fond for a while. We about to bust, so make that fight. Make that fight. Why don't you make that fight? I don't get it. Make it.
I don't really get it either, but I will say this in answer to that. I think it's just, Dana wants to sort of curve Aljamain Sterling for people to want it more. And he thinks if they want it more and more people want it, more people will buy it. If I'm trying to prove a point to my son about him ignoring me and I ignore him and he says, Daddy, 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 he starts yelling, then I go, it's not cool to be ignored, is it? You're proving, Dana's trying to prove a point. You want this kid so bad? Show me. Show me on social media. Show me on here. Show me on there. So I do think there's something to it, but that's the best I got.
I want to hear from Reddit and the YouTube commenters on this. So hit us up because it's weird. It's weird.
There you go. Okay, guys, there you have it. This episode of Early Stoppage on Fight Night Picks is in the books. Be sure and comment under the video. Let us know what you'd like to see next from the show here on YouTube, but also on iTunes and Spotify. I did not allude to this in prior shows. This is kind of just something that I do myself. If you can name who the person was that said the quote that we start the show with, Craig and I might figure something out for you. All right, Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FMP. I can be followed at SM Cornerman. The fight has been stopped. We'll see you next week. Craig, say something witty.
John doesn't control the merch.